guess we're ready here. It seems like this microphone is not on, but I believe it's for the benefit of our friends that are joining on YouTube. So thank you. Oh, and now it is definitely on. Hello. Hi, everyone. My name is Blair Fornwald, and I am the director and curator of the School of Art Gallery. And on behalf of the gallery, I am so pleased to welcome you all. Ooh, there's ghosts in the room. To Photographing Ghosts, a conversation between artists Estelle Chaigne and Shannon Taggart, facilitated by artist Sarah Hodges-Kolisnyk. Did I say your name right? Close. All three are included in the Undead Archive, a multi-site exhibition curated by Dr. Serena Kashevji and currently up at the University of Winnipeg's Gallery 1C03. It opens tomorrow at the School of Art Gallery and the University of Manitoba Archives and Special Collections. We are gathered here today on Treaty 1 territory, and as you know, this is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Nehiyaw or Cree, the Ojibwe, Dakota, and Dene, and the homeland of the Red River Métis Nation. Signed in 1871, Treaty 1 took territory from 7 Cree and Anishinaabe First Nations to make the land available for settler use and ownership. Our fresh drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation, which only recently ended its own boil water advisories and serves as a really persistent reminder that the harms of colonialism are very much with us today, and resources are not distributed equally in this land. The University of Manitoba's official territorial acknowledgement states that we respect the treaties, that we acknowledge the harms of the past, and dedicate ourselves to working with Indigenous communities in a spirit of collaboration and reconciliation. I want to acknowledge that those treaties were not always made in good faith, and that the harms of settler colonialism infiltrate nearly every aspect of contemporary life, and that reconciliation is the responsibility of settlers and representatives of settler institutions. And to be given the opportunity to work in collaboration with Indigenous communities is a real privilege, and it is such a privilege. And yeah, it's a great privilege to be given opportunities to do better than our ancestors. The Undead Archive explores the settler story, looking back at the psychical research of Dr. Thomas Glendenning and Lillian Hamilton. In the 1920s and 30s, this prominent Winnipeg couple would create 700 photographs of seances and ectoplasmic phenomena, which were thought by many at the time to be scientific evidence that the spirit was able to survive corporeal death. The Hamilton photographs have continued to enchant and confound scholars and artists for nearly 100 years, as evidenced in this exhibition. The Undead Archive brings together Hamilton's original photographs and documents and works by 23 contemporary artists who are exploring psychic and spiritual phenomena. The Hamilton family was also involved in colonizing Saskatchewan and Manitoba, and like many North American spiritualists, they occasionally conjured Indigenous ghosts and appropriated Indigenous culture and beliefs while contributing to their suppression. It's really important to unpack this history through an intersectional lens, which Dr. Kashevji does in this exhibition and in her forthcoming book, published by the University of Manitoba Press. It's called The Art of Ectoplasm: Encounters with Winnipeg's Ghost Photographs, and it will launch early this November. Artists in this exhibition and related outreach programming approach the archive and this history and this body of work critically, addressing the parallels between departures from and appropriation of Indigenous, African, and Asian spiritual practices, the subjugation of women mediums who were used as conduits through which others would speak. They queer and unsettle the archive. Some approach this subject matter through the lens of belief, others through a lens of skepticism, others, as articulated, I think, in today's talk, through the lens of new and emergent technologies, both at the beginning of the 20th century and now. Some articulate parallels between this post-pandemic age of the Hamiltons and the one that we're currently navigating, hopefully navigating. The show contains works that are They're variously deeply moving, amorphous and beautiful, uncanny, humorous, abject, maybe scary, and eloquent, providing a rich and well-rounded investigation of the ghosts in the archive and the ghosts that haunt our collective present. The Undead Archive is co-presented by the University of Winnipeg's Gallery 1C03, the University of Manitoba Archives and Special Collections, and us at the School of Art Gallery, University of Manitoba. It features historical photographs and documents from the archives, as well as from the Survival Research Institute of Canada. And it is funded in part through the generous support of the Manitoba Arts Council. It also draws on research that was supported by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, so we're very grateful for that support. There is a particularly rich and fulsome roster of outreach programs associated with this exhibition, and there are too many for me to name in an introduction, but I do want to thank our project partners at MAWA, the Survival Research Institute of Canada, the Winnipeg Film Group, and Dave Barber Cinematheque, The Space Between Us, the University of Manitoba Press, and McNally Robinson for their contributions to this programming. I would also like to thank everyone who made this exhibition and talk possible. Again, it's like far too many people to thank individually at this moment, but I do want to give a special thanks to Justin Baer and our ASL interpreters who are making this hybrid virtual and live space talk broadly accessible. If you are joining on YouTube, you can feel free to leave questions or comments for the discussants in the comment feed, and Justin will relay them to our speakers at the end of the talk during the public Q&A. So thank you for joining virtually as well. I would also just encourage you to check out both our websites and 1CO3's website and our social media feeds for more information about all of the great programming that we have coming up. I would, however, like to encourage you to stick around for a sneak peek of the exhibition downstairs with Serena Kashevji at 1:30 today. It's nearly up, but it's a sneak peek, so you'll want to come back again tomorrow for the reception. And if you've registered for Estelle Chaigne's Third Eye workshop, which follows at 2:30, I think you're in for a very special and magical treat. And so tomorrow is the reception for the Undead Archive. It's going to start at 1CO3 and run from 4 till 6. Then it's going to move to the Archives and Special Collections here at the U of M. That's going to be from 6 until 7. And then you can come to the School of Art Gallery from 7 to 9 to, maybe wrap up your night, maybe not. And there will be a free shuttle bus that you don't have to register to take. It's just first come, first serve. That's going to be departing from the University of Winnipeg at 1CO3 at 5:45 p.m. and driving you to the U of M. And it will, again, depart from the School of Art Gallery at 8:45, taking you back downtown. So if you want to revel, that would be a great way to do it. And finally, I would like to introduce you to our presenters and our moderator for today's talk. So Estelle Chaigne is a photographer and artist living in Rennes, France. Her work utilizes early 20th century cameras, magnesium flashes, temporary tattoos, and digital video, and takes the form of installations, videos, and participatory experiences that bring into play the act of the photographic medium and its ability to show both the visible and the invisible and latent. Shannon Taggart is an author and artist who is based in St. Paul, Minnesota. She was first introduced to the realm of spiritualism during her teenage years and has since embarked on a journey documenting seance rooms and the elusive substance known as ectoplasm, beginning in Lilydale, New York, which is the epicenter of spiritualist practice in North America. Her monograph, Seance, features significant historical imagery from the Hamilton collection, among so many others, really illuminating the rich tapestry of spiritualism's heritage and its continuance into the current day. And Sarah Hodges-Kolisnyk uses analog and digital techniques to engage with the unique qualities and histories of the photographic medium while considering questions of place and identity. She is based just outside of Winnipeg, Manitoba, and works as the director-curator of the MHC Gallery at the Canadian Mennonite University. So thank you so much, Estelle and Shannon and Sarah, for speaking with us today. And thank you all for gathering and joining us for what's going to be a really great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Blair, for the introduction. So the more I have learned about spirit photography, the more I realized that it's a fascinating lens through which to look at the medium of photography itself and the history of photography. So throughout our discussion today, I'll try to loosely move us through a few key questions and moments, while also contemplating the nature of the medium, but specifically in reference to both of your work, of course. So maybe we'll start at the beginning. Maybe we'll start with you, Estelle. Could you please introduce us to yourself and your work?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Hello. Yeah. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everybody, to be here. It's a quick presentation of my work. So I'm gonna, as Blair was saying, I'm Estelle Chaigne and I'm an artist and photographer from Rennes. Okay. I also do videos and music also. This short intro to my work is a quick look through all that I've been moved by during the last years. And mostly, yes, I have to do that at the same time. Sorry, it's kind of complicated. Okay, I have to follow. Oh yeah, maybe, yeah, it will be easier. To make a quick outlook, we can say that I developed my artistic work around the question of the photographic medium and around my obsession to explore the invisible. I'm very interested in the idea of photography being inhabited and able to reveal things beyond the visible. In magic, they say photography is reality. Medium, which witches, healers use photography as a medium, as a transmitter, a votive object through which they can protect or even spell. On this slide, me and my two friends artists, are trying to light a fire with this huge bow. We pimped each of us a part of this bow, and myself, I choose to insert photo of 8 characters that are related to light fires and who could empower our bow. Here you can maybe recognize it's Daenerys Targaryen, as known as, from Game of Thrones. Like, she can really light fires, like, badly. And this is using silver gelatin photography on resin. It's a polyglass thing. And I try to connect with, are you hearing me? No? Not well. Can you, I see this person is not listening, is not really hearing me. Okay. Yes, I'm trying to mix different kind of techniques to make encounter through old-fashioned way of doing photography and contemporary art. Talking about fire, I also created this photo studio. It's called Cell Fire. It's an analog portrait studio using a magnesium flash from the early 20th century. In this studio, you're doing all by yourself. You got the flash on one hand and the photographic trigger pier on the other. It looks like that, and it looks like you're holding a little fire in your hand, and it feels to me like something magical, and it's nothing but a photographic hack getting photographed. That's a connection with a bit spirit photography. I wanted to show you, this is a video, yeah. You have to click it on. Yeah, this is how it looks like, the flash getting getting down. You can do it again. Maybe it's really quick and very short. You cannot think quite anything, and the result of the photo is this. You can pass to the next one. Yeah, it makes those photographs. Like there's something interesting between what can be seen and what cannot be seen, and this kind of flash were used in the séance for making ghosts to appear. And I wanted to show that to you. After lighting lots of fire here and there, you just better find a way to turn them off. This is a video I did. It's digital. It's about people in my country. We call them les passeurs de feu. It can be translated by talking fire or charming fire. I found this translation. I don't know if it makes sense to you, but anyway, you can play the video, Justin, a little? Yes, thank you. Those persons have kind of magic sense in my country. They can hear burnings. Those persons can relieve the pain just by some specific gestures. Some are medium or shaman, or other are just common people, an aunt, friend, who received from family those gestures of care, which are frequently carried out in confidential settings. My camera observed these fluid and simple gestures guided by the energy felt rather than by consciousness. And those persons, by the way, are sometimes the same to be able to speak with dead people. Okay, so talking about talking to dead people, I was also fascinating, and that's why I've been invited by Serena to participate to this exhibition. I'm very interested in the photo spirit, so I was so that I decided to recreate a photo studio. I created this analog photo spirit studio called The Third Eyes, and to try to recreate condition of making those weird and uncanny pictures of 100 years old. People come and sit around the table, they close their eyes, and after the photo is made, they are invited to develop it in the dark room for them to experience, to be in the dark room and to see the magic of analog photography. This is what it's gonna be this afternoon. We're gonna do that this afternoon if you want to join us. Those are a sample of what I did. On the left picture, you can see, barely, Allan Kardec appearing, the father of Spiritism. And this same Kardec once said something I really kept in mind. I'm quoting, "The task of the medium is that of an electric machine which transmits telegraphic dispatches from a point far from the earth. Thus, when we dictate a communication to you, we act on the medium like the telegraph employed on its device." The mediums were also considered like a surface of inscription, an area of registration, just like the photography is. That's why I decided to make the body of women becoming those temporary surface of inscription, in a kind of homage to those women whose 1 century ago found ways to emancipate. Those tattoos represent those two tattoos, this one and this one. Are you following me? Thank you, sir. Those two tattoos represent two mediums from the early 20th century. One was French, Ava Carrière, in 1912, and the other is Ada Emadine, an English photographer. And last autumn, after a month's residency in Winnipeg at the Mawas, back to France, I did it again with the Hamilton's collection images with those friends. And those are the photography you can see down in the art school gallery. And during this same residency, I also discovered how the stereo photographs were used by Hamilton, and I decided to create a series of them with the help of friends I met in Winnipeg. Together, we recreated a seance room and made up some ectoplasm. And they are exhibited at the 103 Gallery, and you can really see, experience the 3D effect. That's quite impressive. And currently, I also working on the performance, and I'm getting more and more with making live forms of sharing my work. Anyway, Nai, it's the name of the performance, means dark in an old language from Brittany. Using using gelatin silver on glass plates, I recreate the revelation process that happens in darkroom, but through 2 or 3 overhead projectors. I mix images to create a slideshow that speaks about the construction of the images, what create a sign, and how we associate signs to create sense. It looks like that, the setup. And next week I will perform this ongoing project at the Winnipeg Film Group, making links between the microstoria, the concept of microstoria, by Carlo Ginzburg. Maybe you know about him, I don't know. No, he's an Italian historian. And the microstoria of countryside, folklore, and the story of photography, the magic and the witchcraft. I'm inviting you on next Tuesday to see that. Thank you. That's the end of the presentation. And I'm giving the mic to you.
Yes.
Sarah again.
Thank you, Estelle. So I have many questions to ask you about your work, but first we will take a look at Shannon's work and introduce that to you. Thank you, Shannon.
Okay. Hello, can you hear me? That's loud enough? Okay. Thank you, Serena and Sarah and Estelle and Blair and everybody here. It's wonderful to be here. I traveled in from St. Paul, Minnesota, and I was going to introduce myself and my work that was 20 years that culminated in the book titled Seance. It came out in 2019 and then was republished just recently by Atelier Editions, so it's out in a new edition. And that work is okay. So the book was made into an exhibition that is currently traveling, and it is forthcoming in Albany, New York, this fall. And so, in the year 2001, I began photographing in Lilydale, New York, the town which is home to the world's largest spiritualist community. And my project ended up taking so long to finish because spiritualism is a really challenging topic. And I thought I'd spend one summer making this short documentary project about this quirky little town in upstate New York, full of all these interesting people who told me they could speak with the dead. But to my surprise, I made a really shocking discovery in Lilydale, and I learned about spiritualism's cultural history, which was a story I had never heard before. Those facts were missing from every textbook I had ever studied from. And I often use this picture of the Italian medium Eusebia Palladino to make the point to audiences that, you know, you don't have to take spiritualism literally to be compelled to take it seriously. Eusebia was studied by the most famous scientists of her day, including several Nobel laureates. Yet stories like hers are often censored. There's been a queasiness about spiritualism in academia and the media. But however uncomfortable, it is undeniable that spiritualism stands at the crossroads of modern Western culture. Its influence echoes in and connects to the history of science, medicine, technology, politics, and art. Wherever you find 19th century innovation, you also find spiritualism. So in Lilydale, I learned, I went to photo school. I went to the Rochester Institute of Technology, which is a very technical photography school. We studied the history of photography extensively. These pictures were not in any of the books in college. So it was the spiritualists who taught me that spiritualism and photography had been connected since their beginnings. And this link between spiritualism and photography became a focus for me. And so, in my opinion, spiritualism's photographic past is one of the most bizarre, absurd, and uniquely unsettling chapters within the history of photography. And one of the most mind-blowing things to me was realizing that it was the first religion to create an iconography using the new medium of photography. You could say that spiritualism is to photography as Catholicism is to painting. And my own work became an attempt to build onto this strange photographic record. So, spiritualism is a complicated topic, and in order to show my work, I had to give people a 101 on spiritualism history before they could even understand where I was coming from with the pictures. So by constantly talking about it, that's how I came to the way of doing the book, the book is really 3 parts. And it begins with a foreword with Dan Aykroyd, the co-creator of Ghostbusters, which serves as our cultural touchstone for the term ectoplasm. And Dan Aykroyd is a 4th-generation spiritualist, Canadian. Ghostbusters was inspired by the Seance diaries of his great-grandfather Samuel, some of which is held in the archives here in Manitoba, University of Manitoba. And Dan also, he allowed me to use Samuel's spirit photo taken in Lilydale. And then the artist and collector Tony Orsler also contributed and writes about the importance of spiritualism in modern art. And he allowed me to draw from his extensive collection of psychic photography. Curator Andreas Fischer, who co-curated this show, he contributes an essay and allowed me to use a lot of images which have never been published before. I have my own essay where I talk about my work, and then I utilize some of the wonderful works held here within the T.G. Hamilton Family Fonds. And so then that's the first section. Second section is 150 of my pictures that just run in sequence without text, covering Lilydale, the Arthur Findlay College in England, the topic of spirit art, the practice of using mediumship in combination with technology, my own photographic technology experiments. Oops. Oh, sorry. I'm thinking that I'm doing it. Sorry. The arc of the narrative revolves around my search for ectoplasm and documents how I finally encounter it. The last chapter addresses the conjuring power of photography itself, playing with the idea of photography as the medium. The last images depict my strangest photographic experiences, ending with an incredible story about a photographic synchronicity. The third section of the book is a story section where it allows me to tell the stories behind the pictures, also cite additional histories, and I get to detail some of the paradrama and some of the spooky encounters I had. And the new edition ends with a new essay by the Canadian filmmaker and Weird Studies podcaster J.F. Martel, and it includes some new pictures of, you can go to the next one, that's not reading that one. New pictures I made during the pandemic of mediums entranced over Skype or FaceTime or Zoom. So that's my intro. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Shannon. So obviously we have lots we can talk about, and we will have time for questions at the end, so make sure you jot them down or hold on to them till then. So I think, like I said, I want to kind of start at the beginning. And so photography itself is born of alchemy. It's a strange reaction of silver to light. And when it was introduced in the mid-19th century, of course, it offered this mysterious ability to materialize indefinitely some distant, disembodied subject. And as many of us will know, Roland Barthes has talked about the photograph not just as a copy of reality, but an emanation of the past, a magic and not an art. And we've used the word magic a couple times today already. I also have there we go, an inspiration quote from academic Eduardo Cadava that talks about the return of what was once there takes the form of a haunting. The possibility of the photographic image requires that such thing as ghosts and phantoms exist. And so I think both of you kind of explore these things in different ways. You talked a little bit about why the photographic medium is important, especially you did in your presentation, Estelle. So I'm curious, can you talk a little bit, maybe we'll start with you, Estelle, and talk about how some of this mystery and this magic has influenced your work. But also, I'm curious, Jeffrey Botchin has talked about that analog photography itself is kind of this nostalgic tool now that we've moved to things like digital. So do we always start with this kind of curious nostalgia and this mystery and this longing for the past? How does that influence your work?
I can maybe tell you that I don't know why at the beginning, but I was always really interested into analog photography because I think that's something attracted me. I didn't make a school of photography. I made a school of art, but it always came back, the photography, and I think that there's this thing that I cannot manage to control everything. Yeah, there's something that I can just try to set up everything to make my thing up. But I like to be surprised. I like the accidents. I like something coming up without being I don't know the word. I don't remember even in French. But you know, when you're trying to do something and something else come up, and I think I like this relation with my art, and it's a bit like the spirit photography came up. Like at first, it was just mistakes. Like they forgot to clean well the place somehow, and those ghosts appeared because that's a way we can see those. So I think accidents are really important, and they are accidents of technique, but they're making up some magic and some mystery, and it makes sense. And that's what I think it's interesting about the magical accident maybe, and but transformed into something which makes sense, which makes you emotional about, because it's an encounter that you didn't anticipate. I think something like that.
Yeah, because photography has this indexical quality, which we've talked about, that it's reflecting reality back into our cameras, but then unexpected things happen. And especially with using things like glass plates, do you find when people are attending your workshops, are they more surprised to see how these older photography techniques work, or are they more surprised to see ghosts in the room after the experience?
I would say both, because mostly people haven't experienced a dark room, and they are really experiencing like, it's like coming from nothing. It's in a liquid, and it comes up, and we're not doing nothing. It was registered. It was invisible, and so I think they like this experience, and also the ghost appearing. But maybe I don't know. They seem to like the experience, and the photo is a kind of a souvenir of this experience, and it makes sense to me.
So maybe I'll ask you a similar question, Shannon. You talked about how you use digital contemporary techniques. You're using a digital camera. You're starting to explore how things appear over Zoom and these different mediums that have become such a part of our daily lives. Do some of these ideas still ring true in your work? This idea of mystery and what's revealed between the moment of what we see with our eyes in the corporeal world and what's revealed in the photograph?
Yes. So there's I would say there's a lot of different types of images in my book. Some are, exposition, very straightforward, dealing with photographic history. Some are kind of working journalistically in some of these spiritualist events. But the more I learned about spiritualism, I started to play with this feedback loop of photography being a medium and running spiritualism against photography and photography against spiritualism, kind of like a loop as a system to learn about the other. Like, I see that the book is kind of really about a photography book about photography in many ways, because I started to play with light and time and long exposures in order to get synchronicities with the invisible experience that I was being told was happening, but I could not see with my eyes. So that when I first started, I thought, spiritualism isn't something you can do a documentary photography project about. And I actually started very straightforwardly. And then through the project, it demanded the play with the medium. And, that's really kind of pushing the boundaries of what is a documentary photograph. But, and, a lot of spiritualists, both spiritualists and like photographers both, kind of gave me like harsh critiques, like how is this even meaningful? What are you doing? And I decided that, playing with light and time, one of the primary, one of the most significant things about like a paranormal experience or a spiritualist experience is this play with like time means nothing. Time becomes something totally different. So then I thought it was kind of oddly appropriate to actually play with time. And the more I did, I was getting really striking synchronicities. And so I really went towards the end of the project, I went very deeply into giving it over to the medium of photography to be the medium.
I love everything you just said as a photographer and someone who's interested in playing with light and time. And I do want to come back to that as we kind of explore some of these questions together. But I want to sit for a minute in this past world of photography and of spirit photography to think about the context. Because I think as contemporary artists, as contemporary beings in the world, we sometimes look at these historic spirit photos as kind of naive, and we wonder how they could be true or how people could be duped if we see them as true or false. So I want to briefly mention the context of the times for those who aren't as familiar. Oh, I don't think it's switching slides. So if we think about the context of these times when we're looking at these older analog techniques, everyone is dealing with these invisible forces, right? And I know, Shannon, you've talked about this, and Estelle, you've explored it as well. People are experiencing things like electricity for the first time, telegraphy, microscopic germs all around us. And so the idea that, spirits could be around us and that there might be ways to communicate with them or capture them don't seem so far-fetched. And I just have one example where photography is used kind of as this scientific tool. This is documenting electromagnetic fields really early on in a photograph around a penny, an electrified penny, I guess. So given photography's uncanny ability to produce these doppelganger images across time and space, it doesn't seem so far-fetched that it would be a great fit for spiritualists. And in fact, lenses were actually used earlier than cameras, right, in these phantasmagorical magic lantern shows where they would be displaying images of ghosts and all kinds of things to this large audience. And it has this really interesting kind of commercial success aspect to it as well, right? There's big performances with smoke and mirrors and all kinds of things. So I want to maybe take a step back to these performances of spirit photography and spirit images and ask you, Estelle, I know performance is something that factors into your work process and into your photography and image creation. So maybe you can talk a little bit about what you've experienced and why performance is important, and how it relates to how people use your images and consume your images, and maybe also talk about why it's important to see them on people's bodies as well, in the form of tattoos.
The performance for me, I think I really care about embodied. Is that clear? This word, yeah, embodied the art. I feel like it's just something. It happens to me when I did an exhibition in the past. I felt like I was abandoning my work. I don't know. I just felt like this way, and I want to be here. I want to chat with people. I want to embody the work. So maybe that's something from apart that I can't explain it much more this, but I also know that I like to create a moment, an attention, to have a time dedicated to my work or to the images I'm creating. And maybe it's about also to load the moment and to load. It's like the same, like embodied maybe, to make them more powerful, or something like that. And that's why I'm using more and more performance, I think. And maybe to, like I was saying before, for something happen that I'm not managing. Even as I'm making my overhead projector project, I don't really know how the glass plate will be revealed, will be processed, and will be seen. And I like to be surprised by my work also. And about the tattoo work, it makes sense to me as I was quoting this Kardec thing about a surface of inscription. It was really like a shock to me. Like, oh, okay, that's how women were considering at this time. Like they were like tools. But at the same time, I felt like they were so clever that they turned it into something powerful, and they created something like men were just like looking at and not understanding, and they were making their own life with this. And I felt like, wow, that's so powerful from them. So I decided to make those contemporary women carry on those images, and to be able to also talk about to the people and tell the story of those images. And I like that they are embodied also. They are considered like a camera almost. I felt like it makes sense to make them exhibiting the photo themselves, like a surface of inscription. And sensible, how does you translate that in French? In English, sensible, it's comment? Sensitive? Yes, sensitive. It has several meanings in French. So it's like a sensibilité. It's like ISO sensibility. It's like a photographic term, and it's also to be sensitive, like you can be touched by things or something. So it makes sense to me that those women, they got this quality men don't have, and they can put something out of this, and that's why I chose to make that happen this way with live walls.
And I think, like the photograph, we talk about that it has this quality. Barthes calls it the punctum, right? To reach across
of course.
To us.
Yes.
And then having this ability to
touch,
reproduce it, and to like bring it out to anyone who wants to see it, to come again and again and live past death, past different realms, past whatever, but reproduce a physical object, whether it's on the body, a print, a performance in front of you. Do you feel like sharing those moments with people gives them more power beyond the moment? Is it important to have that physical piece or physical experience shared by a group of people?
I would say yes. I was just noting, like, where you were talking about indexical, and this is so important to me, and that's why maybe also to wear those, it's to be touched by those, and there's something, a connection. I heard Emma Merkling, you remember her? She was talking about the haptic quality of photography, and like, you want to touch it. It is something in the three-dimensional stereograph also, that you begin to maybe want to touch it, because you cannot see what's happening during the seance. So creating an image where you are getting close to feel the sensation of touching, for me it makes sense. I don't know really well how to explain it, but it touched me. I can say that. I'm moved by that. It makes me think about Marguerite Duras. You know, she's a famous author in France. Marguerite Duras, no, you don't know that. But anyway, she wrote a text about negative hands. We can find those in the, comment on dit, les grottes. Prehistoric cave in France. You can see negative hands, like they spit around like that, and it's paint, and it crossed thousands of years, and it's overwhelming to see those. It's a trace from the past, and it moved me a lot. And there's something about those connection, touching, that, I feel it's important to me. Yeah.
Shannon, do you have thoughts to add about, obviously with your work you talked about that you're using your camera, and you're using kind of techniques of the camera, or tricks of the camera, long exposures, allowing movement to happen in front of the lens and things like that. The camera as a tool to reproduce what you're feeling and experiencing at the moment. So how do you feel about that? Is it important for the camera to be able to bring those intangible experiences and reproduce them in a visual way for audiences?
Yes. I guess most of the writing I've been doing lately is trying to argue, like, for the truth that you can depict in art versus the testable truth of the lab, and like how that is a valid way to speak about reality, and how a lot of what I'm dealing with right now in my latest work is the material that has been discarded or denounced, or the stuff that was made during parapsychological experiments that embarrasses science. And I believe that the artist is the heir to that material, and that artists are reimagining and re-asking the same questions, but coming up with, different answers, and are really giving really interesting angles on the possible, on the imagination, on the imaginal, how this connects to creativity, how it connects to innovation. You could say that the history of innovation in every field is also the history of psychic experience in altered states. Like, that's kind of what I'm thinking of right now. I don't know if that answers.
No, it does, yeah. I'm trying to think of the next question I want to ask. Okay, I'll ask it. I was gonna ask it towards the end, but when you talk about, actually, I know what I'll ask you. So I think that it's really interesting to think about the way that photography pushes boundaries in that way, and that spiritualism pushes boundaries in that way as well. So I know in an interview of yours that I had read, you talked about that you worked with mediums in the past that you felt were likely fraudulent. Obviously, you've had some experiences that felt really moving to you as well. And I think it's important to move beyond this binary of truth versus not truth, or what we can see and what we can feel. So why is it important to you to continue to work with these mediums, even if you maybe have your own doubts about the veracity of what's happening or what's going on?
Well, because I think it connects to something very ancient in culture, which before we divided things up into true and false, ancient cultures had a much more sophisticated way of looking at performance and healing, and you could have your laughs and your healing and your art and your acting and your real paranormal stuff like all in one, and it was accepted as, it gets I think I'm trying to get back to like really basic questions about making an image, or what is a performance, or why do we make images, or why, like I'm trying to get at, like, I feel like photography's gone all the way full circle. It had its war with painting, or its competition with painting, and it succeeded. Here it is in the galleries, it's accepted. And so now you can look at its spookier, or more provocative, or more unnerving aspects, I guess. I don't know if that makes sense. But.
Absolutely, it does. So, in the interim, I will circle back to the moment you just mentioned, where photography kind of has its moment, and we get to kind of this era of modernity, which, there we go. I put this one in because I thought it was an interesting comparison just visually. So we've come through to the turn of the century when box cameras are introduced, and suddenly photography is available to everyone. So these images that were happening early on, these spirit photographs, suddenly, people are seeing them as tricks of the eye, and there's actually a whole movement of kind of unveiling how some of these early double exposures and not cleaned glass plates and things like that might have produced some of these early spirits. But then at the same time, photography has this moment where artists are starting to recognize its ability to take this objective viewpoint, this kind of scientific viewpoint of the world, and turn it into this transcendental kind of moment to show us something beyond what we can see and touch in front of us. Artists like Ansel Adams, Group F64, like Weston up on the screen, who's taking a cabbage leaf and making it into something more just by using the clarity and objectivity of the camera lens. And of course, this also marks a moment in spirit photography where we start to see the embodied, the corporeal become more interesting, and ectoplasms start to emerge. So I just put these two images up because I thought they had such a aesthetic correlation. Obviously the shapes, the clarity, the high contrast, things like that. On the left is the Hamilton image of Mary Marshall, and on the right is Weston. So I want to think about the embodied nature. Estelle, you've talked about that. But also come back to the idea that the photographer is still kind of controlling the camera. So even as we get to these moments beyond maybe the narrative truth of what's happening in the moment, the camera's not always entirely objective. It's still mediated. So I wanted to ask both of you, in what ways do you think you continue to mediate the moment and maybe control the narrative? Or are you, or is it letting the camera do the work of what's being revealed in the scene? Does that question make sense?
You want to go? Well, I guess I'll start with, I mean, there's that Diane Arbus quote, like, I've never taken a picture I intended. They're always like better or worse. And I think even the most pragmatic materialist photographer, and people, I'm talking people who are working in like photographic sports or like food, they're in it for the magic. Like, they're in it because it's creating something different than they see with their eyes. And so I also see like a lot of resistance, like in yes, photography is like kind of done its fine art thing and it's accepted in the fine arts, but there still is the realm of the photographer, and I'm a photographer, I'm not an artist. And this kind of, and I think photography is extremely subversive in many, many ways. And that by labeling yourself a photographer rather than an artist, you kind of get out of some of those complicated things, you know. And so I think it's like an ever-evolving conversation that is like people, there are still, I think in photography, are still holding on to that thing. Well, it is sort of objective, or yes, it is reality. But like, I don't know, I think there's a lot of conversation to be had about what you're really doing when you photograph. And I think because media, you know, the golden age of media has now, you know, we all have the whole craft in our hands, you know. It's no longer a craft, it's no longer a service, it's, you know, there's no longer these big arbiters of what image is, and I just think there's like a whole new conversation we have about photography that's upcoming or forthcoming, or, you know, still to be reckoned with, I guess.
And I wonder too, like I think of this often, that we live in this visually saturated world, and we're not fooled by duplicitous photographs anymore. We all know what Photoshop is. And yet there's still this really interesting connection to spirit photography, the uncanny in images. You know, there's this whole ghost hunters TV shows, and everybody's trying to capture orbs on their ghost tours that they're going on and things like that. Does it reveal, I don't know, some longing or some searching that we as a general public are still doing, and maybe spiritualism and spirit photography is ahead of that curve?
Well, I do think, like specifically, for example, let's take the orbs, you know, the orb thing. You know, a lot of people are like, oh, it's just dust, it's just water, it's just this, it's just that, it's the chip and where the lens or where the flash sits. And that is all beside the point to an orb photographer, because what an orb photographer wants to show you is that their consciousness is interacting with that orb, right? So it's not just about getting the orb, it's about asking the orb to move, or making the room fill with orbs, or zooming in on the orb and seeing what appears in it, or demanding that the orb kind of, you know, give you a message or tell you something. And so what they're really getting at is the power of observation. They're trying to show you that my observation does absolutely affect this image. And like, I mean, I don't want to get into the whole quantum thing, but I mean, we know that observation like affects the world, or affects the way reality presents itself. So I think there's like this whole, being a press photographer, for example, we could all be standing there with the same camera and the same lens. Often we are. I mean, there's not that many big professional, you know, like it's Canon or Nikon, it's this lens or that. And you can stand in a row and you can tell whose pictures is whose. I mean, I've been in the room with photographers. It's like you can see something in their brain, in their pictures, and I don't know how that happens, but it's true. The photographer's eye, that's what that is. You know, I mean, I've been standing shoulder to shoulder with somebody and cannot believe the image that they got that I did not, you know, and it was right in front of both of our faces. So I think like there is this really amazing potential to consider the observation, or how your thoughts are embedded, how it is like literally telepathic in a certain regard, and not in a woo-woo way, and like a, you know, like in a very practical, like obvious way.
So, okay, I'm going to ask you then. I'm going to flip forward a couple images, maybe. Oh, there we go. Back one. There. So then how do you respond to an image like this? So this is an image of the bank of cameras that Hamilton would have set up to capture the moments. And then we also have, so we have these cameras that, for all intents and purposes, have no camera operator behind them. And yet, we still have the medium kind of indicating when to fire the flash to create the actual image. So they're still mediated in some way. The moment is mediated, perhaps.
Right.
And then on top of this, we have Hamilton would be then going out and presenting about these ectoplasm photographs he's made and creating lantern slides out of them. So at some points they might be cropped. The attention might be focused on what Hamilton wants to direct attention to. So to come back to my question, I guess, if we're thinking about this mediated moment and this kind of transcendental, decisive moment of the photographer to say something, beyond what every other photographer in the room might capture, how does that translate to a giant bank of objective cameras with no operator?
So I think that now we're getting to the fact that a camera is a black hole, right? So it's like this lightless space. In the book, I make an analogy between, like the womb, the camera, like the seance room. These are all lightless chambers for origination, right? And I mean, one of the most mysterious things in the universe is a black hole, and time moves differently in that. And even, and I have to also, I am not a scientist. And my son, I have a young son who's obsessed with black holes. And like for a while, we were watching all these black hole videos. And some scientists talk about like the two-dimensional surface of a black hole and how things imprint on an actual black hole, and that just like blew my mind. Like, and how like when you enter a black hole, time transforms, and what it kind of all for me gets back to like a black chamber that is not being observed and catches light and catches things, what happens there. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I think there's something about dark chambers or like processes that, trap, or for origination, or for something coming into being without, being trapped and without light. I don't know. Does that make sense?
I'm curious, is this why you were drawn to photograph the cabinets, like the medium's cabinets?
Well, yeah, I mean, but I mean, like the seance room too, that is, that's a lightless chamber. So if you have cameras in seance rooms and all of that, like that is getting really kind of meta, but.
No, I'm just, I super agree with this history of black holes. I feel exactly the same as, I was thinking about those seance room, like with these cabinets. It's another kind of another place. They're creating another dimension inside the room, and you have to do that, otherwise spirits are not coming.
Yeah, and I think there's something there with like the observation being like free from observation allows freedom for origination, or like this play with reality.
Yeah, maybe. And the thing about the time, I completely agree, and I think like the photography is not something from objectivity, because we cannot stop the time, we cannot observe each frame of reality. It's impossible to have time spread, because you're looking at the stop time. I don't know how to express that better, but it's invented the reality, because you never got the chance to observe things like that. You were talking about sport photography. That's a good example, because you never see people floating in the air like that in suspension. It's impossible. You're creating something, and I'm really convinced about that. Photography is creating something. It's adding to the reality. It's not just showing the reality. But yeah, I mean, of course, it's something we can criticize and say. But still, that from my point of view, there is a time of photography that does not exist. So it's a creation. And that's what I liked in this medium too. Yes.
So I think, some of the things we've talked about is that the camera makes real, embodies through a photograph. It's mediated by the camera lens, it's mediated by the camera operator. But it's making this reproducible piece of communication that can be discussed and bring us together. But at the same time, disembodied spirits can make real through things like ectoplasm and be mediated through these mediums, which, as you mentioned, are typically female, which is a whole other really interesting topic. And it's this means of communication that can be reproduced from beyond the grave, perhaps. So I think to bring it back around to today, and maybe this isn't a fair question, maybe it's too hard, but what do spirit photographs still have to reveal to us in this day and age when we're surrounded by images all the time?
You mean the vintage images, or
no,
like the
I mean moving forward as we keep going, as obviously, you know, you're still producing your work with very different techniques. You're using contemporary techniques, you're using analog techniques. What do we have to still learn from these today?
Yeah, I can start.
Oh,
Like you want.
Go.
Okay. I just can take maybe I just can talk about what we did last year with the girl I met here, and when we recreated a kind of seance together with Lily, which is here, Colette, Roxy, and Christine, and to be able to photograph in stereo and to create new images of that. And I think like the question was, we know perfectly how to make this thing up. We know how to create these kind of images. That what we shared this afternoon was more about who we would like to see appearing, who are our influence, or who are our contemporary ghosts. Like it's not something tangible, but mostly like, I don't know if I make myself very understandable, but if I'm talking about myself and who I would like to see appear here, because it makes sense to me, and I get to confront this ghost or this apparition, because it's about my history, and it's like a little new ritual to face what we are scared of or what we are inspired by, or something like that. So for me, it was the purpose of getting through this seance. Maybe like at first, spirit photography was, it's how I can feel it. It was a way to heal people for the griefs, not for the griefs of the mourning. Yeah. And it was good for them to connect with their dead on the picture, and it made them feel maybe better. And I felt like today to reenact those kind of seance to me was to do something like that, but with the consciousness of making everything up, of course, but still we are talking about our ghost and our heritage and everything, so it's working maybe the same. I don't know if it's very clear to you, but that's
so part of our grief process, or part of our
part of process of being consciousness of dealing with what's hunting us intimately,
part of our humanity, and working through it.
Something like that.
Shannon?
So I mean, I guess I think that photography remains a mystery, and there are many ways still to play with it. And also part of the reason that it is a mystery is because you are playing with light and time, and also that photography just in its own essence is spirit photography itself, because whatever you photograph is then gone. And it's every photograph you take will one day be a spirit photograph. And also the way photographs change over time, and the way layers of time change meaning of photographs. And so I I really think that, you know, what I love about photography is just it's such a mysterious thing, and I think there's so much space for play and so much, and I am more excited about like working with photography than ever, which I would think, you know, after doing it for so long I would be bored, but no, I'm very excited. So I guess, I don't know if that answers the question, but I think photography is has endless possibilities for us still.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, I wonder if this is a good place to pause and open up questions, as I'm sure there's probably quite a few. So maybe we can start in the room. And there's a microphone in this corner. If you have any questions, you can come up so that audiences on YouTube can hear as well. And if you have questions, if you're out there on YouTube, you can put them in the comments. Is that right? Or yeah. And then we'll share them with the room as well, and we can address those questions. So.
Just this tiny little specter. Thank you so much. That was a really, really interesting discussion. I have a question kind of for Shannon, but maybe Estelle has something, or Sarah as well. So in like the sort of scholarship and in the history of spiritualism and psychical research, there's a lot of sort of attention to the way that mediums and spiritualists are adopting the language of science and technology and kind of misappropriating it or borrowing from it. With the most obvious example obviously being the Fox sisters and their spiritual telegraph, which comes 4 years after Samuel Morse invents the code or whatever. I'm wondering, Shannon, in your work with mediums at Lilydale and with just like spiritualist practitioners, if they are describing what they're doing in this sort of like technical language, especially in relationship to photography, if there's any way in which they're describing their abilities that remind you of the way that photographers talk about their practice. Part of my interest in that is because while the sort of historiography has typically been that, you know, this is pseudoscience and the way that the spiritualists and mediums are sort of appropriating the language of science is inappropriate, like it's not real, so therefore it's just like nonsense. More recently, I think there's a turn to seeing these sorts of discourses where mediums and spiritualists are comparing what they're doing to inventions in modern technology as part of this competition over authority on images. So I don't know if there's supposed to be a question in there about if you're seeing that kind of language or competition or borrowing happening with your work.
Well, so yeah, spiritualism it's a religion that was aiming to merge religion and science, right? And when it came about, the scientists were proving, you know, invisible forces are around us, the invisible forces have agency in our lives, like germ theory of disease, the power of electricity, like the ether, all that. And so it is embedded in, since its beginning, that kind of languaging for spiritualism. And that's what makes spiritualism different from, well, a lot of people classify spiritualism as a cult because obviously they're speaking to spirits of the dead. But what makes it not a cult is the fact that it is open and conducted. Nothing's hidden, it's not, there's not these processes that the public, that are only for initiated members. You know, it's done in the spirit of a scientific experiment. So like the language of science is just embedded in their religion. It's just because they were trying to merge religion and science. So it's not, for them, it's not pseudoscience. It's more like, it's just this natural thing that happened, I guess. I don't know. Yeah, they were hoping, like, through the repetition of proving over and over again that you can talk to the dead. It would be like almost scientific. It would be like a religious act done scientifically for proof. And even like spiritualist art is not just art. All spiritualist art is supposed to attest to a truth of, it's supposed to be scientific testimony as well as art for this religion. So it's all kind of like deeply embedded in that, in it as a religious movement. And yeah, so they still do use like that kind of languaging. And also that's why, you know, in seances, cameras were always present. You know, if you go to like other traditions, like or other occult practices, you are not allowed to bring a camera. It does not make sense. It makes sense in spiritualism because it's been part of it since the beginning. I don't know if that answers the question.
I have a question for you, Estelle, and this goes back to something we were kind of talking a little bit about, and the healing and how the healers use a photograph. Sometimes not even the person might not be present, but the idea that a photograph is imbued with spirit somehow, and that a healer could connect with that part of the photograph, that spirit in the photograph, and then heal through a photograph. So I guess in my mind it kind of relates a little bit, but that almost in the flip side, that the healers are adopting photography or something magical about photography, like.
Yeah, that's something we spoke about yesterday evening, but that's not something I really deep into to study it. It's something I just encountered during me making this video of healers of burnings. Because they told me that they can do it by the phone or with just a photo of the person who is burned. And I was like, okay, so I was not at all on this subject. I was really into feeling the invisible and the gesture, and to feel the thing really, the density of the moment, something like that. So I was not getting interesting in that, but I kept in mind, and I said, wow, it's like the photo and you're getting to the person, and just because I don't know. So I'm sorry, I didn't really chat with them about that. I think it will be some kind of next work to be done, because it's really interesting. And I also saw, but you know, I don't know the name. You can have a little photo and you put it on the puppet and you put spell on it or something like that, and you can create those kind of object. And it was existing. I saw some during an exhibition about witchcraft in Brittany some years ago, and that is something I really kept in mind, that the photography is able to be used as a medium to the person it represents. And I thought maybe it's because the indexical quality, that the photo is a light touching the person and the light reflected by this person on this image. It's like a kind of touch. And I don't know, I cannot really explain that, but that's really something which interests me, like the use of the photography, not in her artwork, not in the documentation, but in magical stuff. Yeah.
Other questions?
I have one, and it kind of, my question kind of builds on your last question of the formal talk, Sarah, where you asked what spirit photographs might be, or what we can still learn from them. And I started thinking about like what the emergent technologies of the current day are. And I think there's a real parallel to like artificial intelligence as kind of the emergent technology that is similarly troubling our sense of objective reality and sentience and what the creative act is. Maybe in a way that's quite similar to how photography really troubled these notions, and spirit photography in particular. So I'm wondering, as we're kind of entering into this world where we're a little bit, or maybe we're on the precipice of not knowing whether we're speaking to a human or whether a person or something else that is approaching sentience like made something. I'm wondering if there are any learnings from the history of photography and spiritualist photography in particular. That's a hard question, but yeah.
I don't, like, I'm not sure what to say because, I mean, actually I've been avoiding AI, you know, because and you know, early on, a lot of my spiritualist friends were playing with it, and then everybody got bored. But like, something I think is really something to think about is that with AI, you have image based on language. Like, language is being used to make the image. So it's almost this merging of image and language. And, you know, I actually am taking a class right now about like a philosophical class about thinking about AI, and it just started, so I can't really say, you know, just unpacking it. But that was just like one of the things, like, oh, this is language. It's all run by language. And I don't know, I mean, something that kind of blows my mind, and I don't know what to think about it. And I do know that my spiritualist friends who were playing with it, you know, it gets boring really fast. So, for now. So who knows? I mean, yeah, it's kind of crazy to think about.
Yeah, I wonder if, and I don't think we're there yet, but I think, so some of my research has revolved around the way that images have become communication, because they're so dominant now. And so I wonder, it was interesting what you said, Shannon, about language becoming image, and I wonder if there's a way that something interesting can be revealed, some spirit or ghost in the machine kind of idea, if we think of how we can use AI exclusively visually. Like, how can we take this giant body of images that are now produced on social media and produced out in this online world, that are this form of visual communication, this visual dialogue going on constantly back and forth, and what algorithms and AI can do with that, and what can be produced through that. And I don't know, but you know, if we think about the historic spiritualist spirit photos, and the idea that they represent these disembodied spirits trying to communicate something in a way that's tangible to our worlds, I wonder if that kind of concept can translate to AI. Like, what can AI translate to us visually based on this body of language that's out there, visual language? And I don't know what the answer is, but it could be really interesting.
Who wrote that data set? Like, we all collectively did, but someday they're going to be drawing a data set written by ghosts.
Yeah. Oh, I like it. Someone should do something with that. Any other questions? Okay.
For anybody or everybody, I'm wondering, in the context of photography as both magic and document, and your work being a kind of conjuring, how you understand your own silences, whether they're intentional or not.
Could you maybe clarify what you mean by silence?
Absence.
Absence.
Things you do not document.
Okay.
Or by accident, or
Okay. No, that's great.
Well, I think, like, as a photographer, you go for everything, but in the edit is where you decide where you're silent and where you're. So that, like, brings in the whole other thing, because that is a huge aspect of being a photographer, is the edit. It's actually the primary act. I mean, like, it's secondary, but it's, I would argue, equally important. So I think that it comes in after the fact, if that makes sense.
Do we have maybe time for like one more question, one or two?
Lily, you had a question?
On the channel? Okay. One. So a question from the room and a question from the internet.
Hi. I love the Dada movement. I'm a die-hard Dadaist, and I'm wondering what you think of how the Dada movement impacted spiritualism and performance art. And I mean, there's so much to that movement that, like, contemporary art today goes back to that movement. That's, yeah.
I think that they were influenced by spiritualists, and a lot of ideas about, like, time, or certainly the surrealists were, but I'd have to, I'm not an expert, but I do think it was that spiritualism lent some inspiration to the movement itself rather than the other way around.
Like, there's a lot of sort of text saying how the Dada movement kind of spawned performance art, but that's probably not really accurate.
Well, there's a historian named Simone Natal who wrote a book called Supernatural Entertainments, where he's arguing that spiritualism helped invent show business.
Right.
So
right.
I think all of that stuff kind of is intersecting.
Right. Right. Okay. All right. More food for thought.
One more question from the internet.
So we have one question from YouTube. Hopefully I'm pronouncing this right. Dwell in Faith. Question: in France, are Allan Kardec's mediumship circles typically created in dark rooms themselves? What are the similarities in physical mediumship? What are the similarities between mediumship between France and the USA?
Well, I can speak to the difference between Kardec. Spiritualism was turned into spiritism via Allan Kardec in France, and he wanted to write a text because spiritualism does not have a text. So he was writing a philosophical work, trying to give the movement a text. But one of the primary differences is he got very into the reincarnation thing, and that is one of the primary distinctions, is that spiritism believes in reincarnation and spiritualism technically doesn't, although I do have a medium friend who said, well, spiritualists are kind of like the Catholics with birth control. You're not supposed to believe in reincarnation, but we do. Like, so there is like a lot of blurring, but that is like, if you're getting really technical, in France, that's the Kardecian like innovation, bringing the text, and then this whole idea of reincarnation. And then that goes to the colonies, and then now spiritualism is most active, I would say, in Brazil. It's where it's most alive, is through this Kardecian lens that then mixed with their culture.
I got nothing to add to what you're very more specialized in those history facts than I am. And I thought about Serena, but she left. She could have answered like maybe a bit ahead.
I guess speaking of Serena, if anybody is interested, Serena will be giving a tour of the exhibition. A sneak peek, as I said, it's almost ready. So if anybody would like to go down to the gallery and join her, she'll be able to unpack. And maybe we can ask her about Kardecian spiritualism and how does she feel about it. Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to run down there and introduce her.